Good evening. Hello. No, good afternoon. Don't confuse me. You used to hear me say that. Tuesday, July 7, Phyllis Wheatley, Poet Laureate of the American Revolution. An enslaved person, she was also the first published African American poet and writer, and dedicated a poem to the chief, George Washington. He was impressed enough to visit her in Boston. She's portrayed by Daisy Century, who is from Philadelphia. That will be Tuesday, July 7 at noon. Welcome back to our semi-quincentennial celebration. We're offering the multifaceted thing. We have the exhibit upstairs, which includes land grants, documents signed by Jefferson, Adams, Madison, Marshall, Patrick Henry. So pretty cool. Check it out. And we have the new historical review that Julia's distributing now. You get a free copy, which is all about America 250. And our guest came back. He was here last week. And he's back. Sometimes they don't come back. Phillip S. Greenwalt is the co-founder of Emerging Revolutionary War and a full-time historian with Emerging Civil War. He is the author or co-author of 7 books on the American Revolution and Civil Wars. He brought some of them tonight if you'd like to check them out. He is a 2008 graduate of Wheeling Jesuit University with a degree in history. He also holds graduate degrees in American history from George Mason and international affairs and leadership from Arizona State. He's currently in Baltimore, Maryland, and he's worked for the National Park Service for the last 19 years. Please welcome back Phillip Greenwalt.
Thank you. And if you guys keep raising the temperature, this will be the last time I come back. I don't know if I can. Well, thank you for coming out on this very momentous day, July 2nd. Very, very important in American history for multiple reasons. One we'll talk about in a few minutes. And of course, obviously, if you're a Civil War fanatic, it is the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. But before we get started, I thought we'd have a cool little trivia. Where did they sign the Declaration of Independence? Exactly, or at the bottom of the page. So, growing up in Maryland, the 4 Maryland signers will get together on August 4th, and they will sign it. If you're a movie buff, if you saw the movie National Treasure, the second one, they talk about Charles Carroll Carrollton. He is a Maryland signer. He's the longest surviving signer, lives well into the 19th century. But he taught us going to school in Maryland a little way to remember all 4 Maryland signers, and that is that Carroll chased Paca with a stone. So Carroll, Chase, Paca, and Stone are the 4 Marylanders. They just never taught us their first names, so I had to go back and do that. But last week we got up to the Revolution. Paraphrasing John Adams, we're going to cross the Rubicon, or the crossing of the Rubicon, independence declared. Now, I picked the image behind it because in November of 22 or 23, they found the remains of American soldiers on the battlefield of Camden in South Carolina. Most of them were from the 1st or 2nd Maryland that fought there. One was, I think, a Scott Islander, and one was a Native American. Just recently, they identified one of those soldiers, and he was 17 years old when he got killed at the Battle of Camden. They traced it back, and he actually joined Washington's army in 1777. He ran away from home. He was 14 years old. And so they now know him. Pomfrey is his last name. He had fought through 4 years of war from the northern to the southern theater. And so one of those unknown grave sites will now become probably his name on it. But just thought on this day of all days to honor the guys that paid the sacrifice for what independence meant. And so we'll get started from there. I know I'd love to talk about everything, but we don't have a whole year to do it. So I was going to just kind of nail these 4 parts, keep the war going, keep and have time for questions at the end. So first, I'd like to bring up Boston, because Boston does expand. This is a map we had made for one of the books. And so this is what Boston looked like in 1775, 1776. So just up in the top corner there, you see Copp's Hill, Old North Church at the long end. Down, you see out through the Back Bay, that's Boston Neck, how it connected. Today, a lot of that is obviously filled in. Right now, it's probably pretty dry because the Scots just left after the World Cup. But this is Boston at the time. Today, it has grown both in land mass and population. It has swelled. But Boston is the seat of the British government. And so last week we got them up to April 19th. So Gage is going to develop a plan to go out toward Concord and get either the munitions or some of the Patriots believe potentially and Samuel Adams. So what Gage is going to do is he's going to detail this plan. And he realizes that his soldiery, he has regiments of foot, which are infantry regiments. You always refer to them as the British Army. He has Royal Marines. So here's another question for you to be interactive. Why is the British Army not called the Royal British Army? Because they're the ones that overthrew the monarchy under Cromwell, and so they have lost the ability to call themselves royal. So they will always refer to as the British Army. You'll have the Royal Marines, the Royal Navy, later on the Royal Air Force, and so forth. And so the British Army units are there. So is a contingent of Royal Marines under a guy named John Pitcairn. And so in that, you have, of course, the various companies. So you have what's called the Grenadier companies. Those are usually the tallest guys. So probably would be me. They would put a bigger hat on you. And they got the name from the 17th century because those were the guys that actually kind of throw grenades longer, not as we see today, but they would try to breach the holes in castles, fortresses, and so forth. Now, they don't do that anymore by the 18th century, but that's stayed a company of honor. And then you have the light infantry. Those are the small guys. Those are the ones that are more on the flank. So they'd be skirmishers. They are trained to fight more like Native Americans or some of the colonists. So each of these units have it. So Gage comes up with this idea. Instead of sending a whole regiment out, I'm going to handpick the best of my troops. I'm going to send out a contingent of Royal Marines. I'm going to send out light infantry units. So it's basically like if you take all these tables, you guys say you're the 10th Regiment of Foot. You're now going to work over here with like the 27th Regiment of Foot. You may know them, you may think they're, but you never went into battle with them. And so you're hoping that they will know what you know, and you know what they know. So not a problem, right? Let's mix it all up right before we go marching out into the countryside. So in addition, it's like going to an all-star game. Yeah, you have LeBron James and all these guys, but they're never used to working with each other. In addition, they think they're going to quietly sneak out of the town. We know that doesn't happen. It also doesn't happen when you start pulling troops off of guard duty. You start confining them to their barracks. People start to wonder why there's a little different atmosphere going on in Boston, and of course, news goes out. Dr. Warren sends out, of course, those messengers. Paul Revere rides out through goes out to north, of course, the Old North Church, one by land, two by sea. He goes out. William Dawes has made his way around already. He rides out through Boston Neck. As Paul Revere rides into the towns, he yells, "The regulars are coming," or "the regulars are coming out." He does not yell, "The British are coming," because at that time they still view themselves as British. It'd be like me running through this crowd right now going, "The Americans are coming." You guys be like, "Okay, they come every day. That's all of us." And so he's yelling the regulars. And as he does, he hits one town. That town sends out an express rider. The other town, when that express rider gets to the second town, they send another one out. They send another one out. So it's like a ripple effect. Paul Revere will get to Lexington. He'll ride a little bit past the town to a spot along the Battle Road where he meets a guy named Prescott who's coming back from Lexington because he's courting a woman. He's a doctor in Concord. He has somehow been out till midnight, 1 a.m. So I'm not sure what that lady's father thought of him staying over that long. But he rides back. He meets Revere and Dawes. He says, okay, they know me in Concord. We'll spread out. They get to this spot about 1:30 or so in the morning. There is no daylight savings time at that time. And they run into the advance of those British forces. And as they do, Revere will be captured initially. Dawes escapes, and Prescott gets to Concord. So today you can get to that spot on Dawes or on Battle Road, and hopefully there's not cigar butts when you try to take the picture. But they weren't mine, so I didn't want to pick them up. So just ignore that they're there. There were no cigar butts at 1:30 in the morning when they got there. So now that chain reaction has happened, it'll spread. It spreads all the way up to almost the border of what is now Maine and Massachusetts, New Hampshire and Massachusetts. It spreads down into Connecticut, where apparently Israel Putnam stops plowing his field and rides off the battle, which I always found was interesting because what is his wife thinking? Like, hey, he's out there plowing, next minute he's just gone. And you're like, well, I guess Israel Putnam's going off the war. So he's coming, and so all these forces are congregating toward the British. Meanwhile, the alarm has gone into Lexington. Now, Lexington does not have a Minuteman company. They're only militia. And there's a lot of myth about the militia of Lexington. John Parker is the captain of it. He is not a French and Indian War veteran. In fact, they have him in the town of Lexington when he's supposed to be at the siege of Louisbourg, according to what has been passed down. So they get the alarm at 12:31 in the morning, so they come out onto the green. Well, the British are still trying to get across the back bay and into formation. So Parker, after a while, dispatches his militia that have gathered. The ones that are too far from the center of town will head to this place, Buckman's Tavern, where they're going to hang out. Other ones will go home if they live in the town of Lexington. And so that's what's going on as they wait for the British to arrive. Now, the British are going to march into town. They're going to come up from Cambridge there, head toward that triangle, which is the Lexington Green. If you've been there, right where the M is that big statue of the Patriot today. Buckman's Tavern to the right. Unfortunately, leading it is a member of the 4th Regiment of Foot, Jesse Adair, who is a 19-year-old junior officer. Now, if you can get your mind back to when you're 19, sometimes your emotions run ahead of your logical thinking. This is your first time in enemy territory. Yes, this is the vaunted British Army that defeated the French, but that was, 12 years ago? So a lot of these troops have been in garrison duty. A lot of them have been in Boston last, few years. And now they're marching up, and Parker's militia is on the green. So instead of Jesse Adair taking them toward Concord, some reason he takes them out into the field before Major Pitcairn can get to the front, before Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith of the 10th Regiment of Foot can get up to the front. And so now you have Jesse Adair lining the British, you have Parker's militia coming out onto the green, and you have a standoff. Now, if you remember what we learned in school, apparently John Parker says, do not fire first, but if they fire, let it begin here. He never says that, because behind him is Jonathan Harrington's house. Daniel Harrington, another gentleman in the militia. The whole town of Lexington is surrounding the green. Why would Captain Parker want to start a firefight in the middle of his town? So they wait, the 4th and then 10th Light Infantry wait, and that is when the first shot happens, supposedly from Buckman's Tavern. But the 4th and 10th Infantry will let loose a volley. They will hit a few of the militia, including Jonathan Harrington, who will bleed out somewhere between that line and his house. Now, if you go there today, it says he crawled all the way back to the threshold. We don't know that for certain. He did get part of the way at least. And the militia after will disperse. By this time, Francis Smith has come up. There's a huzzah. He gets the men in order. And then they're going to get back into column and head out. And so Parker's militia initially will hit and receive fire. None of the British are hit. There are wounded. There are killed in the town square. Parker, though, will get his revenge later on the day. And so I do invite you to go to Lexington and Concord, because they just found where Parker will regroup his militia. And it's exactly different than it was for the last 100 years. They marked the wrong spot. And they did archaeology, and they realized he's farther up the hill. So they put a whole new trail. And so now you have the sign that says Parker's Revenge here. And they're like, just kidding. Follow the trail that way. And so definitely you can see that Parker has a great mind. But as he's doing that, the British are going to start marching toward Concord. And as they do, they're going to come up what's called the Lexington Road. I know it's hard to follow, but you're going to see this is the route of the British coming in. You're going to have some American riders coming out. One of them, a guy named Reuben Brown, was asked by the militia and up here on the training field to go to Lexington. And he starts heading to Lexington when he hears the shots. And he goes, he turns around and comes back. So they ask him, well, did the British shoot? Yeah, I heard gunfire. Or are they shooting blanks? And Reuben Brown says, I didn't really get that close. So now the militia and Minutemen that are gaining on Punkatasset Hill don't know if the British have actually started a war or battle, or they're just scaring off militia. But as they come into town, the Patriots are going to stay outside the hill. Smith is going to break up his troops, send some to the South Bridge, some to the North Bridge. Some will start going through the town. They're told to disperse all the military equipment they can get, which includes they take musket balls and they start throwing them into the mill pond, because now they're tired and slightly lazy because they've been up all morning. That doesn't really damage musket balls. All the Concord citizens do is wait till the British march out of town. They take fishing nets and they fish the musket balls out. They also start chopping down the Liberty Pole. They start taking the artillery carriages that the militia had started to make, and they start lighting a fire and burning that stuff in the middle of the town. This is where it gets interesting. Because sitting up on top of Punkatasset Hill, they start seeing Barrett, Buttrick, and Isaac Davis from Acton, Massachusetts, can see smoke starting to rise from the town. It gets worse. Embers from that fire fall onto a neighboring house, starts to burn it. They're wondering, okay, the fire is starting to pick up. As they think the British are burning the town, at the same time as they're asking, Hosmer is asking a junior officer of the militia, are you going to let the British burn our town? The British are actually doing the exact opposite. They have stacked their muskets, they have created a bucket brigade, and they're trying to get the house that has caught fire to, put it out with water. Well, if you're dumping a whole bunch of water onto a big fire, smoke usually picks up more. So as the smoke picks up more, the militia on top of the hill think now more of the town is burning. So you have this big miscommunication. If they could have just talked to each other, they would realize the British are trying to save the town. Americans are thinking they're going to burn it. So here is where, and I will argue, we can debate, we can have a friendly conversation. This day, April 19th, is where I think the U.S. Army first was created. Because they will organize on Punkatasset Hill, they will be under a command structure, and will come down that hill under orders. And so here is the first time an American military force is acting under what the U.S. Army regulations later be. They have company officers, they're following men down the hill. They run into the North Bridge, well, there's firing going on. So they hit one or two of those light infantry companies at the North Bridge. And then you have this other light infantry company way over here. And these are the guys I feel really sorry for, because they're out here at Barrett's Farm, and they have no idea that the American Revolution is starting behind them. So as the Americans fire into the North Bridge, these guys come walking right back. They pretty much say, excuse me, they get by, they line up on the other side, and they start shooting again at each other. First few guys, Isaac Davis, is unfortunately killed coming into it, and then there's a lull. And there's a lull as Smith pulls the men back from Concord, until this gentleman, who now is described as being mentally ill, comes out and he actually hatchets one of the severely wounded British soldiers, and both sides see it. Now the British realize, the Americans must not be taking prisoners. The Americans are going, oh crap, the British are going to think we're just trying to slaughter them. And that sets the tone for the rest of the day. 19 miles these soldiers are going to fight back through what is now the Battle Road. They'll get to places like Merriam's Corner, where they'll what's called the Bloody Angle. They'll escape back through into a place called today Arlington, or back then it was Menotomy. This is the Jason Russell House. As they get toward Menotomy, the town constricts, and they start receiving fire from the Jason Russell House. Inside the Jason Russell House, these guys are starting to fire back. You can go inside today. This is a bullet hole from a British musket. They are firing up. This musket ball has gone through the outer wall, the inner wall, and behind it goes through the railing, because these British soldiers are now just firing into anything they can see. They're losing command structure. Russell will be killed along with numerous British soldiers in the house, but he gets known as the gentleman who, like a true Englishman, defends his house like a castle. So it's now owned by the town, and you can go visit. They do a nice tour through it. But the tragic story, of course, and you can't have an American story without alcohol. And so Jabez Wyman and Jason Winship has been drinking Cooper's Tavern, and they're just having a good old time. The war is starting behind them. The British are raiding through the town. Now they're starting to push through houses because they're getting fought from places like the Russell House. And these two gentlemen keep drinking in the tavern. They are still drinking Flip, the colonial drink, when they are killed in the tavern. So when they say alcohol kills, it actually does. The jokes don't get any better, I promise. But on that note, I knew a question would come up. Phil, what is Flip? And this is how you make it. Dark beer, rum, 2 large eggs, you put a sweetener in it, and some spice. That's what they're drinking all day. So they said it's better with ginger, but if you don't like ginger, you can have nutmeg. I have made it once. It is terrible. I'd rather drink Robitussin all day, but maybe I just didn't heat it enough. This here is actually something they heated up, and they put it in like a precursor to the frothers that you have at like Starbucks. Yeah, so that's probably the catch. You got to have that heated up enough. So if anybody wants to capture it, I'll put the slide back up at the end, but or I don't know, maybe Sean can have a flip making demonstration here as part of the 250th. So you get back to Boston, and this is what's great about Boston, is that everyone's like, has the war started? Has it not started? What do we do? What are we not doing? Militia are arriving, and it becomes a de facto siege. Initially, the British will come through what is now Cambridge into Charleston. They will defend what is now Bunker Hill. They'll build a line of entrenchments on the night of April 19th. The next day, Gage says, actually, I want you to pull back. So they fill in the mounds at Bunker Hill, which the Americans later on will be like, oh, this is great. You've already started the work. And so the American lines will kind of continue around. You can see Dorchester Heights all the way at the bottom right. Cambridge will become the headquarters of the Provisional Army. A poor guy named Artemus Ward will ride in from Shrewsbury. He is suffering kidney or gallstones, but he rides over 40 miles on a horse. So definitely a high pain tolerance. He gets to Cambridge. If you go today, you have the Commons. You've got that small little college, I think it's pronounced Harvard, that sits there. And then you have this little marker, and we have it in the book, but it's where the house was, that the Hastings House that they used as the first headquarters for the Provincial Army of Massachusetts. Lichmere Point is where the British had started their march. The Americans will defend, and it becomes this kind of siege. What's going to go on? No one really knows. The Americans don't have enough gunpowder to really face anything. The British are in Boston. They got the Navy. Both sides are going to kind of uneasy truce. There'll be slight movement. Israel Putnam will go over to Noodles Island, try to take some and basically no one knows what's going on. Is it a war? Do we have an altercation? Is this Parliament's fault? So there's a lot of questions in April and into May. But as they do, it comes into early June. Still questions are happening. There's the Continental Congress meeting down in Philadelphia. They have known that this guy named Richard Henry Lee has put a proposal together to send it up to potential declare these colonies independent and free. And then this is what's kind of awesome about this time. We always think we're the easiest ones with communication and so forth. However, Gage has a meeting in Boston. Somebody hears about what's going on, but they're from New Hampshire. So they send the notice to New Hampshire that the British are planning something in Boston. Someone in New Hampshire goes, this is gold, and they send it to the Provincial Congress meeting in Cambridge. And this is how Artemus Ward and Dr. Warren decide that they should fortify Breeds Hill. They read this note, and it says, an honorable man from New Hampshire says the British are going to advance in mid-June. And they're like, well, they said he's honorable, so we got to believe him. And that is exactly how the planning starts for what we become the Battle of Bunker Hill. So it's just one honorable man who's been lost to history. So that's why men are not honorable anymore. No, I'm just kidding. So in the middle of the night, they come up with a guy named William Prescott. He's a colonel. They have Richard Gridley, who's also in this picture, Israel Putnam. Their objective is to go to Bunker Hill, fortify Bunker Hill to stop the British from coming over and taking it. And so in the middle of the night, these three guys leading the units, they're marching out of Cambridge. They march less than 6 miles. They all march ahead. They're so excited, they actually forget their supplies. So there's a bunch of food in Cambridge. They get left behind. They head there. They get to Bunker Hill, and they decide, nah, this is too far back. We're going to actually march farther, and we're going to fortify Breeds Hill. There's, 30 people in the room? We could come up with 30 reasons why they defy the orders and build at Breeds Hill. And as they're at Breeds Hill, one of the reasons, it's only a mile from here to Copp's Hill. So now the British have to do something, is one of the thoughts. Because at Bunker Hill, they could ignore you. At Breeds Hill, it's pretty much like me coming into your front yard and setting up a tent and saying, I live there now. Well, you guys are going to be like, well, no, you don't. So you're going to try to evict me. And that's what the British is going to do. Prescott is going to dig his entrenchment along Breeds Hill. He's going to send men into Charleston. And morning comes, the British realize, wait, the Americans are right over across in Charlestown. And it sends them into a frenzy. Initially, they'll start the long-range artillery at Copp's Hill. They'll try to fire into Prescott's forces. They will try to get the guns from the British Navy, kind of right where Pitcairn's name is. The HMS Lively can't fire high enough up. But some of these guns at Copp's Hill, which is at burial ground today, are firing into the earthen fort. Prescott, who is a rather large man, is overseeing these militia as they build this earthwork. And Prescott shows amazing battlefield fortitude and leadership. Because one of those shells bounces along and hits this gentleman from Billerica, Massachusetts, and decapitates him right in front of his forces. Close enough to Prescott that Prescott writes he will remove blood and brain matter from his frock coat. Now, his soldiers want to stop and bury this guy. That's what you do at the time. You want a good burial. Prescott realizes, no, it's going to dishearten the troops, so he tells them to remove the body as quickly as possible and keep digging. And so the British are going to figure out a plan. They don't think the militia are going to do much. So they're going to come over, Pitcairn under Howe and his second in command, Pigot. They're going to try to attack Breeds Hill. At the same time, the infamous light infantry are going to come up along the Mystic River and the sandy beach. Today, there's a small marker where the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment is. It says this is where the rail fence. And this is the true Iron Man of the Revolution, if you're a Marvel fanatic, because this is Colonel John Stark. John Stark will put his New Hampshire men, he'll take over both the 3rd and 1st. Robert Knowlton has the 3rd Connecticut, and these guys go, you know what? I know the New Hampshire men can fight, but these British are going to come storming up with the light infantry and the grenadiers. So as they're getting formed up, the light infantry near Moulton's Hill, Stark goes out and he starts counting 100 paces. And he says, say this is 100 paces. When the British get here, you fire. Do not fire until you see them hit this stick. And that's exactly what they do. They pile up the British. And they pile them up so Howe's army cannot get around the left flank. So we're used to the British, and they do. They come up in lines like that. They come up the hill. They do not have a T-set. So Howe's not that silly of bringing a T-set onto the battlefield. But his men get stuck along the Mystic River, so the action goes up the hill. This is the bloodiest engagement the British will fight in the war. Almost 27% of the officers that will be killed or die in the war fall at Breeds or Bunker Hill. 1,054, almost 50% of the British soldiers that come across that day will be killed or wounded. That is why Nathaniel Greene says, I wish we could sell them another hill at this price. This is why I believe that Bunker Hill is the only American defeat on land that stays in our popular memory. I put it up there with Pearl Harbor as 2 battles, both on land and sea, that the Americans lose. But if you ask people about Bunker Hill, they know something about it. So if you can think of one that beats or trumps that, I will give you $1 after the talk. But I've kept that $1 for the last 2 years giving this talk, so no pressure. British come up the hill. The other myth, what do we hear about Bunker Hill? Do not fire until you see the... Never says it. They don't know where it comes from. There was officers that said it in the French and Indian War. If any of the American officers, like Israel Putnam, or Prescott, or Warren, or Stark said it, they would have said, do not fire until you see the whites of their stockings. Because once again, the Americans are on a hill. They're aiming down. If you wait to see the whites of their eyes, remember, this is a 9 to 11-pound musket, depending on what you have. And it's up on your shoulder. I love watching movies when you see them put the musket up here, because the kickback of that would give you a concussion. So you're putting it in your shoulder. And so your natural reaction when it kicks is to fire up. So by telling these men to fire low, if you kick up, you're still hit a soldier. If you're aiming here and you kick up, it's going to fly over their heads. And so the British will come up twice. The third time they break through because the Americans just run out of gunpowder and lead. They have nothing to fight with. Warren, who's joined this fight for some reason, will be one of the last ones killed. Prescott will get his troops off the field. He gets back to Cambridge. And I love this quote from Prescott. He tells Ward, give me 3 more regiments and I'll go back and take that hill. And Ward says, no, enough has been done today. The British will burn the town there. Today you can go across, and the city has put a stone foundation where the Three Cranes Tavern is, so you can see one of the buildings and how they did the archaeology to find it after it was burnt. But the British win the Battle of Breeds Hill, as we know, the Battle of Bunkers Hill, fought on Breeds Hill. But the Americans lose about 450 men, but they now realize they can stand up to the British. I included this because I didn't know where to put it exactly, but I love this story. So Knox is a bookseller in Boston. He meets Lucy. Her maiden name is Flucker or Fluker. You always have to make sure you say that right, because otherwise this talk becomes rated R real quick. She's from a loyalist family. He and her will be they get married, and right after Lexington Concord, they sneak out. They sneak out of the city. She will never see her family again. They are loyalists. They head back eventually to Great Britain. Knox will supersede Richard Gridley in charge of artillery. He actually creates an artillery school during the war that becomes, they think, the precursor to West Point. But she is pregnant with their first child. Henry Knox meets Washington, comes up with an idea that he's going to get the artillery from Fort Ticonderoga and bring it all the way down to Cambridge. Before he does that, he deposits Miss Lucy Knox now out here in Worcester with people she just met a few weeks ago, and she's a few months pregnant. He writes her a letter, and I invite you to read the letter, because no matter what century you live in, men always try to find that it wasn't their idea that they're going to go away, that they were ordered to do it. So Henry Knox is like, look, General Washington, and I'm paraphrasing, kind of maybe wants me to go to Fort Ticonderoga and get these guns. Don't worry, there's no battles going to happen. I'll be completely safe while you stay here with these people you just met and you go through your pregnancy. Amazingly, they stay married. More amazingly, he's 24 years old. She is 18 years old at this time. So imagine being 18 years old, you've just lost your family, you're pregnant, you're now in a house with people you just met. The only person you know is going to go to God knows who, where, to get some artillery and bring it back in the middle of winter. Years after the war, they're shipping their letters up to where they will live in Maine, and someone decides at last minute to wrap it in type of whale skin or something that's waterproof. The ship sinks, but the trunk survives, and those letters are intact. And about 10 years ago, a professor found them, and he's now published the Henry Knox and Lucy Knox letters. And that one I just talked about is in there. So I love the Adams letters. I love these more because they're 24 and 18. They are young people dealing with this major revolution. But Knox is able to bring these guns all the way to Cambridge to basically to lift the siege of Boston. At Dorchester Heights in early March of 1776, they build a whole fortification and move it up on top of the hill. And Howe says, these Americans have done more in one night than my army could do in a month. Knox will stay with Washington through the war. He becomes his first Secretary of War. He retires to Maine. He continues to gain weight, and he dies by choking on a chicken bone because no one can reach around him to do the Heimlich because he's too big. So I guess it's when it's your time, your time, I guess. So, but as that's going on in Philadelphia, they now have taken this proposal by Richard Henry Lee, who's one of two brothers to sign the Declaration, his brother Francis Lightfoot. Richard Henry Lee is initially supposed to be there to write it, but some type of business venture or illness will take him back to Virginia. That's when Thomas Jefferson gets the role. Of course, Ben Franklin, John Adams is there, Roger Sherman, who's always forgotten, the Declaration Committee. They write, and you can get this off today, great quotes about it. They bring it over to Congress, and on today, 250 years ago, this morning in Philadelphia, they will put it up to a vote, Richard Henry Lee's, and 12 of the 13 colonies, New York abstaining, will declare that they are free and independent states. And if you listen to John Adams, because you kind of have to because he talked a lot, he says July 2nd is the day that we should celebrate our independence. So today is an early Independence Day. 2 days later, Hancock signs it with his big script. Charles Thompson signs it as the Secretary of the Continental Congress, and then it's official. 5 days later, it makes it up to New York City, where Washington is with the Army for the next campaign, and he reads it out to the troops. And so they know by July 9th that they have declared themselves independent from Great Britain, which is great, but those are words on a paper that hundreds of men have to decide. And I love this one because John Hancock, you can see how big his writing is. I love his expression. He's like, look what I did. Yeah. And everyone's like, uh-oh. I love this guy the best. Like, this is not going to end well. This picture was actually taken in late June. And I thought it was neat because you can see a lot of yellow and orange. This was the day that Ecuador was playing their first World Cup game. And they had taken over the Liberty Bell. They were going inside the Independence Hall, and they were learning about liberty and the openness of a place of power, ideals, and promise. So it was neat to take this picture. But that is, of course, the Philadelphia State House. The background, you see how big buildings have gotten now. This was one of the larger buildings in 1776. But independence is declared. Now the Americans just have to win it. And they're going to have to win it initially in New York. So Washington doesn't want to fight in New York because, well, there's things called rivers, and the Americans don't have a navy, and the British kind of do, and they're bringing thousands and thousands of men with them. But Washington's told he's supposed to defend it. And so he's going to fight a series of battles. One of them, which I'm going to concentrate on here, is you see the names Sullivan and Sterling. They kind of make this check mark at the bottom in this marsh. My graduate thesis at George Mason was on the 1st Maryland, which was part of Lord Sterling's troops. He's a Scottish heritage. He says he's a lord. The Parliament doesn't recognize it in Great Britain. That doesn't stop him, William Sterling, from announcing that he's a lord. So he just goes to the war announcing that he's a lord. So I guess that's all it takes. If you want to be the Lord of Wheeling, just announce it and go about your day. But as they do, the British are going to flank them, and they're going to push it back. Washington and his men are going to try to escape across the East River, and they're going to be ferried across by a guy named John Glover from Massachusetts, who's better known for what he does at Trenton and Princeton. But he evacuates these men across the river to save them from Brooklyn. But it's now known in Baltimore as the Maryland 400. There's 400 Maryland soldiers, knowing that they are going to sacrifice their lives, will charge out to try to stunt the British advance. Within 20 to 30 minutes, 250 of them will be killed, wounded, or captured. One of the paintings, the best painting depicting that fight around Gowanus and the square. 20 guys survived that charge, and 4 years later, they charge into the British again at Guilford Courthouse and survive that. So 20 survivors survived two of the most horrific charges in American Revolutionary War history. And some of those guys are as young at this battle as 16 years old. So independence hinges on teenagers that are willing to charge into the best and biggest of the European militaries. Washington sees this from across the river and utters, "My God, what good men I must lose this day." The British will eventually push Washington out. He pushes them up to a place called Fort Washington, where today, of course, there's a nice bridge going across it. The Americans would love to have that bridge in 1776, but they didn't. The 3,000 American soldiers will be captured at Fort Washington. Another Fort Lee across the river is evacuated. New York will stay with the British until 1783. When it's evacuated, it will be the largest and most continuous British hold in North America, in the rebellion colonies, I should say. Washington's men have gone from about 12 to 15,000 when they started this campaign down to 3,500. These are the men that are going to quickly move themselves across New Jersey, heading toward Pennsylvania. This is a quote from the Common Sense. These are the times that try men's souls. He said, never attempt to give all the particulars of our retreat. All these frequently without rest, covering or provision, bore it with a manly and martial spirit. There are guys wearing blankets. There are guys without shoes and food. They get across into Philadelphia. Continental Congress says, glad you're here. You know what, Washington? We trust you, but the British are coming. We're going to leave. So you have fun here. We're going to go. This is how bad you know it is. Continental Congress says, we're going to go to Baltimore. That seems safer. So at no time does people ever go, I'm going to Baltimore because it sounds safer. But they head down to Baltimore where they're going to meet. If you've ever been to Baltimore today or in the last few years, the CFG Arena that sits downtown, that is where the Continental Congress is going to meet. Across the street, Catherine Goddard will have a print shop. She will make the first authenticated copies of the Declaration of Independence. So if you read it, at the bottom, it actually says her name printed in Baltimore. So the Continental Congress are there, where Washington is going to plan a last gasp effort to correct the course of the revolution. He will have a meeting, and if you ever see the movie The Crossing, it is pretty accurate. I think it's Kelsey Grammer plays Washington. The call sign is victory or death. Washington is going to get his men 3 different columns. The main force with him, there's going to be militia on either side. They're going to come and basically hem in these Hessian soldiers. Washington's going to get across the Delaware River, and we all know the famous painting of him up here. That's Washington. James Monroe is technically holding the flag. Monroe will go across. He's not in the same boat. But I hate to do this. This is not the right painting. Washington would not have stood up on the side of the boat. Someone would have told him to sit his ass down because it would have sunk it. Monroe, they don't have a flag that way. They're not. This is what it would have looked like as they go across. They're more flat bottom bateaus. They're getting the artillery on. These men are coming across. They're huddled up. It takes all day to get them out. It's icy. It's cold. The only 2 casualties that night are 2 soldiers that make it across to New Jersey. They sit down to wait for the rest of their command, and they freeze to death. They're so malnourished, they don't have the energy to get back up. And so those 2 men will be the only ones that are fatalities during this engagement. Always love it that this is Christmas night, and the easiest way to get into New Jersey at Christmas time is by water. Probably still today as well. But Washington's going to get over, and he's going to get frustrated. They're behind schedule. And then he hears that one of his subordinates has launched an attack already on the guards of the Hessians because they have captured some of his troops. So now Washington thinks his surprise is over. So they're not drinking and having revelry, the Hessians. It is snow, it is ice. Men don't fight in winter. They've also been told of an attack coming. So this little militia engagement is what they believe the attack was. So now they think they're safe. Washington, though, springs the attack. And this is him coming in. Of course, through the streets, they push the Hessians out. During the fighting, the artillery under Knox will start firing artillery down the street. Someone shoots back, and it hits James Monroe in the right shoulder. James Monroe would have actually bled out on the streets of Trenton if he did not defy direct orders. Because before they went across, A surgeon who did not have a command said, "Can I attach myself to your artillery unit?" Monroe goes up to his commander, and the commander says, "No, we don't know who he is. Do not let him come." Monroe thinks better of it and says, "You know what? Come along. One more soldier, especially one that knows medical arts, would probably be proficient and helpful." So as Monroe falls with this bullet in his shoulder, this surgeon walks up and puts his fingers into the wound, holding the artery until he can get stuffing to hold and close the wound and put his jacket over top of it. So if this surgeon did not do that to James Monroe, we would not have, the 5th president of the United States. So luckily, every once in a while, you should defy an order if it saves your life. But Trenton is a victory. The Hessians are mostly captured. Washington sneaks back across the river. And then Washington does the unthinkable again. He comes back across. Battle of Second Trenton. This one always gets lost. So Washington comes across. It's actually called Assunpink Creek because his men will line up along the Assunpink Creek, which you can see in downtown Trenton. I know Trenton is not the safest city, but if you go during the hours of 10 and 2, it's okay. So Washington's come over. These men with him are now staying along for another 10 days, and they're being paid by Spanish galleons, Dutch money. Basically, Washington has said, in the next 10 days, you can do more to save this revolution than any other time in our history. So Cornwallis is upset. The British general is supposed to be going back to Great Britain because his wife is sick and dying. He's literally on the dock to get onto the boat when Howe says, "Look, Washington is causing trouble." So he pulls Cornwallis back. Cornwallis will fight this battle of Assunpink Creek or Second Trenton on January 2nd, push Washington down toward the banks where he thinks, as he says, we have the fox cornered. The fox being Washington. The next day, we'll go over and bag the old fox. Washington doesn't know what to do. He's caught along the Delaware River. Cornwallis is in front of him, and now he's in an unenviable spot because his back's against the river. So he calls a council of war, and he said, "Why don't we sneak out, and we can make it to Princeton. We can get behind Cornwallis, sneak out, attack the garrison of Princeton, get supplies, and then head up onto maybe another town, Bordentown, and so forth, to try to capture the British war chest." So Washington and his men will stoke fires, they'll put straw around the wheels, and they'll sneak out around Cornwallis's flank. And they head up to Princeton. At the same time, this is ironic, Mulhood, the garrison in Princeton, has been told by Cornwallis to march down to Assunpink Creek because he needs more troops for the next morning's attack on Washington's troops. So Washington and his men are marching up one road, Mulhood and his men are marching down the other road, and suddenly one of the Americans under Hugh Mercer looks over and goes, "Hey, Captain, there's a glint off bayonets." And they go, "The crap, the British are there." And the British, suddenly, someone looks over and says, "There's dust on that other road. The Americans are there." And so the Battle of Princeton happens because two smart, eagle-eyed people notice that they're basically marching in opposite directions. Hugh Mercer will attack initially. Hugh Mercer, unfortunately, falls this day on January 3rd. He is the only general that I know of that has this distinction of being bayoneted to death on the field of battle. So I don't know of anyone else who has copied that, nor should you. But Hugh Mercer, who escaped the Jacobite rebellion, looked like Washington, is bayoneted. They still have the marker where he falls. Washington takes command as he comes onto the field, and he said at no time during the war did Washington basically show himself in bravery and in a position that one of his aides will actually said, as the British fire, I will cover my eyes because there's no way that General Washington could have survived that volley. But he does. Washington survives it. The battle is fought before Wallace can get up there. It is another American victory. And then Washington heads to Morristown, New Jersey, for the winter of 1777, 1778, or 76, 77, excuse me. This is considered today the 10 crucial days that saves the American Revolution. And today, you can go up on Christmas. They still do the crossing of the Delaware. There's still the original road trace that the soldiers take up from the hillside, so you can follow these footsteps. And they actually, at Washington's Crossing State Park, have a copy of one of those bateaux or bateaux that they took across the river. So, if you don't want to be around family on Christmas, you got plans now. You can go to Trenton and recreate the crossing of the Delaware. But the revolution continues from here. 1777 will see the largest engagements in the American Revolution on September 11th, 1777 at Brandywine. It will see the pivot point at Saratoga. The war, though, continues another 6 years. But if you didn't notice, we're, I guess, under all those books. So you can, Ohio County Library is a great place. Or, like Hancock, you can get your laptop out. This is Hancock's, literally a laptop. And you can, if you want to follow us on Emerging Revolutionary War, two of my compatriots were actually there at 7:30 in the morning, one dressed as a colonial behind Independence Hall, and gave the real-time updates of what was happening. And so everything is free on Emerging Revolutionary War. So if you ever get anything that says, hey, give us money, that's not us. We're historians. We don't know what money is. And so Emerging Revolutionary War is our goal in the next few years, is to get people immersed into what is happening. And so we're doing these real-time programs and so forth. But I would like to take any questions, but initially I like the news from the American at the Patriots, or the Patriots in the dumps. So that is a British newspaper article. I would like to thank everyone here at the Ohio County Library for everyone that's come the last 2 weeks, or just this week. As another thank you, if you're interested in one of those books, I do discount them to $10 for these talks. I think that's cheaper than Amazon. I haven't checked the last few days, so you're more than welcome to do that. But if you're interested, see me after. But otherwise, if there's any questions, let me know. But once again, thank you for coming out on this great, momentous day.
That was great, Philip. Thanks. If anybody has a question for Philip, please raise your hand. I'll come to you with a mic.
You mentioned the Declaration was affected by a committee, including not just Jefferson, the principal author, but Adams, Franklin, Sherman, and Livingston. We know a little bit about Franklin's and Adams' contributions to this editorial process, but you don't hear much about Sherman's or Livingston's contributions. Do we know anything, or is that lost to time?
So we do know that they go over the question is the two forgotten committee members. So unfortunately, Sherman and Livingston, they do make recommendations. Jefferson is Adams will have to counsel Jefferson that what happens in that committee is okay, because Jefferson can be a little prickly, and having 4 other people look at your writing and basically critique it and take out things can get a little frustrating. And so we do know that both Livingston and Sherman will make recommendations in that committee. There is a great book about the Adams will talk about what he did. Ben Franklin will talk about, he makes the reference to the store of what, like, the guy wants to put his sign up to be a hatter, and he says he wants to be so-and-so and Sons, and then one guy comes by and goes, well, they know they're your sons, take that off. And the next guy goes, well, everyone should know you if you make hats, take that off. So by the time they get done on the critiques, it's just a picture of a hat on the sign. And so Franklin's saying for Jefferson, it's still your work, even if they take it all down. And so there is good committee notes about what those two, and I don't know exactly their specific edits, but I do know they are active in it, along with Adams. But it is Jefferson will write it all because he is the most elegant writer.
Anybody else have a question? We can take one more question. No? All right. Thank you, Philip.
All right.